there's great truth in all spiritual traditions, however corrupted they become. And they often do become very corrupted, especially as they get old. But even the worst of them, if you go back to the original teachings and you go back to some of the best of the early discoveries of them, have truths about human nature in them. That's how they lasted so long. Any spiritual tradition that's lasted a long time has truth in it. So you burn away all the crap that's kind of accumulated and all the worst aspects of it, and you'll see deep truths about human nature and how to live on the earth, and notions about the divine and what that means. And as I said earlier, I think every culture that's ever lasted has had a sense of the sacred at its center, and it's had a sense of a kind of sacred architecture of the universe, the pattern of reality, which is not the rational, linear, human-centered rational reality that we've invented for ourselves out of our clever modern human minds. It's something that's much bigger than us, and that we have to relate to in a way that isn't purely rational. It does involve kind of ritual and prayer and respect and understanding of non-human nature and all these things that we feel very uncomfortable with now. As you say, we hate all this sort of stuff. No one wants to talk about rituals and prayers and sacred landscapes and all that sort of stuff. But for any old faith tradition or any indigenous community, that stuff's just completely normal. It's just taken for granted. Obviously, the world's like that. Obviously, everything is alive. Obviously, the divine is in everything. Obviously, there's a creator you have to bow your head to. Obviously, you have to respect the forest as you take food from it. That's just common sense to most people from that sort of that worldview, which was everybody once, really. Wherever we come from, that was all of our ancestors at some point. It's not a question of Western versus indigenous people. Everyone was indigenous once. So that's all there. And we're the abnormal ones. And that's the thing. We don't like to hear that. But actually, we're the weirdos here. It's very interesting. 88% of the world is religious. Okay. Now, 30 years ago, it was 80%, right? It's gone up. It's really interesting, this. Only 12% of the world is not. Only 12% of the world would be regarded as agnostic or atheist, secular. And that's all of us in the West, basically. So it's actually a very weird worldview that Western people who are atheists or humanists have. It's very unusual. And if you stop believing in the myth of progress, that everybody's going to end up going in the same direction as us, then you can see that actually what we did was we kind of went down a dead end. We thought we'd just follow our human cleverness as far as it went. And this is where it got us. So now we have to walk backwards again and find out where we took the wrong turn. And that's not a question of historically returning to a particular period, because we can't do that anyway. But we do have to go back to where we went wrong and say, okay, well, what's the sane way to look at the earth then? And as I say, yeah, I think it's a good idea to look into different indigenous ways of seeing and older sort of faith-based ways of seeing as well, because we do have the opportunity to kind of, as I say, get to the truth of those and start to see that sort of thing again, and hopefully avoid the kind of worst aspects of some of those as well that you always end up with. Whenever humans get involved in anything on a big scale, they mess it up. But that doesn't mean there isn't truth at the heart of it somewhere. So you can still go and find it. You said religion is inevitable, and I thought that really stuck with me, because I thought, yeah, that's exactly right. Religion is inevitable. So it can take any number of shapes, and some of those shapes could be hideous, right? You could be the Aztecs cutting the hearts out of children and throwing them down pyramids, or you can indeed be, Christians burning witches. Humans are all fallen, and so we all do this stuff. I don't know of any faith tradition that is not responsible for things like that. Even the Buddhists are at it in Burma. The atheists, obviously, in Russia and China are at it, or were at it. The Muslims are at it. There's not a religious tradition, or indeed ideological tradition, that doesn't involve some people wanting to kill or oppress others in order to force it onto them, which is a human manifestation. That doesn't excuse anything Christians have done. I'm not interested in defending terrible things that have happened, but it's certainly not unique to Christianity. It's a way that humans behave. And it tends to be a way that humans behave, certainly in the Christian tradition, right? That's a thing you can only do if you're not actually following what you're taught to do by Christ. There's no way you could behave like that if you were actually listening to the Sermon on the Mount properly. It's not actually very complicated. We know that. There's no justification for a holy war or any of these other things. And there's not any justification for forced conversions or any of the other stuff that's happened. So it's more that when you tie up a religious belief with kind of institutionalization and empire and power and money and all of these other things, then you're going to get this terrible stew. So I don't think that it's, as I say, it's not inherent to the claim of a faith that people behave barbarously in its name, because they'll behave barbarously in the name of anything. So there's any number of shapes that fanaticism can take. And if it isn't tempered by the fact that you're supposed to carry a cross, and if it isn't tempered by the fact that you have to love your enemies even when they hate you, right? You are mandated to love the people you hate, basically, and you'd better make an effort to do that, because and you've got to forgive people 70 times, 7 times, and all of this stuff, which none of us wants to do, and it's really hard. But that's, it's got to be a reason that Christ is endlessly telling us that, and also endlessly telling us how problematic wealth is. And St. Paul's great quote about how God uses the meek to humble the strong. He uses the weak to teach the powerful. And the fact that Christ spends all his time with the poor and the meek and the dirty and all the people who are shunned. He never spends any time with the powerful at all until right at the end. And then when Pilate asks him what truth is, he won't tell him. He just says, my kingdom is not of this world. It's got nothing to do with you. If you want to know what truth is, you better take your shoes off and follow me, because I'm not going to explain it to you here. And if you haven't leavened it with that sacrifice of yourself and not other people, that's the key thing. You've got to sacrifice yourself and not the bad guys out there, because we all hate the bad guys out there, and they're never us.
So I know that you're interested in various religious traditions, but most of them do have a sort of dualism of that. There's body and there's soul. Do you reject that idea too? Or are they actually the same thing in your mind? Or how do you, I know you're interested in that. What's the link?
It depends on the tradition, actually. I mean, they're all quite different. I mean, and there are different aspects to different traditions. So if you take the traditional Christian view, for example, I think in the West, we tend to assume, I certainly grew up assuming, that the Christian view is that there's a thing called a soul which can be separated from the body, and after you die, it goes off to heaven or hell, depending on how well you've behaved. That wasn't the traditional Christian view, actually, at all, the original view for a long time, and it still isn't the view in Orthodoxy, or indeed Catholicism. Christians believe in a bodily resurrection. You will die, but at the second coming of Christ, you'll be bodily resurrected, in your body again, or a new version of your body. And the kingdom of heaven, the kingdom of God, is not a place on the clouds, it's here. It's a resurrected new version of earth, a better one without all the death and pain. So that's the original Christian story, actually. So there isn't really a dualism in Christianity, curiously enough. The soul and the body are not things that are separate. That's what I was talking about when I talked about Gnosticism. Gnosticism was an early heresy which said, actually, you know what? Matter is evil. What we think is God is actually an evil force, and we are divine sparks of soul trapped in this horrible matter, and we have to use esoteric knowledge to get ourselves out and have union with the true God. That's why I'm talking about techno-Gnosticism in Silicon Valley. It's a disturbingly similar prospect. That's the early Christian story. And again, any religion that would be referred to as pagan has a deep connection between humans and nature and the human body. Every indigenous tradition would have that. So there certainly is probably, or maybe, depending on what your beliefs are, some immortal soul, but it's deeply connected to the body. There's no suggestion that it could be anything other than that. And if you step out of religion and just look at what science can actually show, you won't see any evidence that a thing called a soul or a mind could survive without a body. I mean, they're all deeply interconnected to each other. How would you even measure mind? How would you measure consciousness? No one even knows how to do that yet. So there's no actual indication that you could even upload a mind into anything else. What would that even look like? We aren't anything but what we are. The world is alive and we are alive and we're intimately part of it. And as I say, most indigenous traditions and most traditional cultures will work with that, but modern culture says, no, we want to go beyond that. We don't want to be embodied. We don't want nature. We don't want to be part of this. We want to build a better world. I think that's a very religious notion, even though we treat it as if it were rational. I don't think it's rational at all. It's very irrational, actually, to behave like this.
Yeah, it's a real puzzle. The more I understand what a religion is and what a religion does, the more the idea of sort of fairly naive, maybe slightly more new agey kind of, we can have some kind of spiritual core that isn't a religion, seems quite naive, because you actually realize, no, there's so much. It's such a vast structure, Christianity or any religion, that provides so many different layers of meaning for different people, depending on where they are in the developmental kind of path, that it seems an impossible task. Like it's a completely open question. I'm much more open to the idea that something like, well, that Christianity is the only way that we could renew ourselves spiritually than I think I was maybe 2 or 3 years ago. But I still have a bit of a block believing that it could be possible.
If you take it seriously, if you take any religion seriously, it's the most important thing in the world. And if you don't take it seriously, then there's no point in doing it. I mean, that's fundamentally where it comes down to. It's not something you can sort of try and do on a Sunday morning. It doesn't. It has to. It reshapes you. Actually, it transforms you. If it's not transforming you, then it's not. Something's wrong with it. So it's a radical thing. I feel it transforming me slowly, more slowly than I'd like it to. But you do have to believe it, I think. And I think, you do have to take the leap of faith. I mean, it's like any religious claim. You have to say, I'm this is truth. I believe it to be truth, and I'm going to live as if it is. And if you can't do that, then something else will fill the void. I mean, the way I see it is it's like there's a throne at the heart of each culture, right? And somebody sits on the throne. And if you dethrone the person who sits on it, which in the case of the West was Christ, then someone else is going to come in. Which in our case, I think is kind of machine capitalism, mammon, I suppose. Someone's going to be that you're going to worship something, right? Whether you know it or not. And I think that's who we are. So that raises a lot of questions about what we're worshiping now, because what happens is you create a culture and then that hardens into a civilization. The civilization for a while creates glorious things like empires and great cathedrals and machinery. But even while that's happening, it's rotting from within, because the culture that it was built on, which is the sense of the sacred, but also practical stuff like having a peasantry and having an artisan tradition and having actual stuff that comes up from the ground, that's all being hollowed out. Everybody gets shoved into giant cities. Then they all turn on each other. Then if the religion goes, which it usually does, then you've got nothing left except lots of people in cities fighting. And that's where you get to. But there's a stage that comes after that, which he calls the Second Religiousness, which is where people turn back to religion, right? Not necessarily in the form that they found it before. So it's not like you go back and try to recreate Christendom or anything else, but you realize that there's an utter meaninglessness at the heart of everything.
Right.
And then people start to turn back to religion or forward to religion or look for ways of moving it. And I do wonder whether that's starting to happen actually, or whether it will be the thing that happens in the next couple of generations, because people are going to, I mean, I see it everywhere, and a lot of people are looking at orthodoxy now, but also other faiths too.
That's right.
It's not again, it's not a Christian thing. It's like so many people are searching for spiritual truth, not always finding it. That's what I was doing for a long time. But I think in young generations, people are going to do that more and more, because they're just going to say, look, what the hell is the meaning of this? What is going on? What is the center? Obviously, the thing is that if you say that we dethroned Christ, we got rid of Christianity and Christendom, we replaced it with mammon, we replaced it with the myth of progress, right? The myth of material progress. And for a while that worked. We were getting lots of good stuff all the time, and generations were getting richer than the generations before, and we were relieving poverty, and those things are real, and we had cars and planes and all sorts of stuff. So we could look at the world around us and we could say, yeah, things are getting better in the material realm, and so that's all that matters, and the other stuff was just old superstition. But now for younger generation, things are not getting better in the West anyway. They're getting worse, right? So people are, like you say, the people are despairing, they can't afford a house, where's the work, the culture's gone, people just feel like it's hollow. So the myth of progress won't hold because it isn't delivering. And at that point, I think people do start going, well, what's the big story here? What have we lost? What have we broken? What's the mess? Progress didn't deliver. Why have we got to this point? Because if the story was true, we wouldn't be at this point, right? We'd be continuing to improve.
Well,
so maybe we end up with a second religiousness and we start going into that, and things get interesting at that point. So something's gone badly wrong. And it's because we've taken away the things that actually gave us meaning, which I think are community, real community on the ground, not talking to people on Twitter, but actual neighbors, community, families that work, roots in a place, a place that you belong to. Might not be the place you come from, but it's the place you belong to, your home, basically. And a sense of the sacred, a spiritual core to something, whether it's a formal religion or something else. I think every culture on earth has always been built around an understanding of what is sacred. And there have been lots of different understandings all throughout time and culture and place. But I don't think there's ever been a culture that has existed or has survived for 5 minutes without some notion of the sacred at its core. Every culture has a sacred center, except ours, because at the center of our culture is a shopping mall. And I mean, you can judge a civilization or a culture by what its highest buildings are, right? Are they churches or mosques or cathedrals, or are they banks and skyscrapers full of expensive apartments? I mean, that's what ours is. You can go to any city in Europe and you can see these great old cathedrals completely dwarfed by Goldman Sachs, or a shopping mall next door. And that's symbolic of what we've become. We've basically taken away the sources of meaning, place, community, religion, faith, whatever aspect that is. Nature as well, deep connection to the non-human world. You can't really be human without a connection to things that aren't human as well, the rest of nature, and just replaced it with stuff and material stuff. And however good that stuff is, it's completely meaningless without that, which is why you can have the richest country in the world where everybody's depressed. I don't think many people would say America is a healthy society at the moment. No offense, but like I say, it's just that America is just the greatest manifestation of everything that the West has become, that the modern world has become, not just the West either, because it's happening in China and India and all sorts of other places too now. It's the bargain, and the bargain was wrong. So, but the interesting thing is that more and more people are realizing that now. So then the question becomes, okay, so what do you think is sacred then? If it's a spiritual crisis, what's the thing that you've lost, and how do you get it back or recreate it in a new form? I think that question is going to become really big actually in the next few decades. It's like, okay, what do we think is sacred here? It has to be something that's bigger than us. It's not about us. But if you take away, I think G.K. Chesterton, the English writer, he said, it's not religion that's the opium of the people, it's irreligion. Because if people don't worship something greater than them, they end up worshiping themselves, right? Which is basically where we've got to. So whatever you think of any particular religion, I think that's always true. So, we need something that's bigger than us that we kind of bend our heads to. Otherwise, we turn into Elon Musk, right? Yeah. our new God. We've got him now. We don't need anything else. If you experience that, as you say, there's something much bigger than us, and that this is a spiritual crisis, then you need to go looking for it. You need to go and open yourself up. You need to get praying, but you need to go searching. I mean, this is what I've done, and what so many other people have done. Go and look for the truth, and look for it in places you might not expect it, and expect it to come to you, and try and understand that this thing that we're all part of is very much bigger than us, and that we're not in control of it, and that's okay. And that doesn't mean we can't do anything or that we haven't got a part to play, but it does mean that there's a bigger story that you're part of. And if you think that's true, go out and find someone who can tell you that story properly, and watch out for the false prophets, because there's a lot of them around, literally trying to make profits from their prophecy. But just go out and go searching, do the reading, go and talk to people who spiritually you respect. Go and, as I say, look in places that you might not expect. Go to a liturgy in a church and see what happens. Go and open yourself up to it, because I do think that there has to be, and there will be, a big turning back towards a vision of the world that's called around faith, actually, and called around the divine, because that's what the world is, I think, fundamentally. And we're going to resist that kicking and screaming all the way as a culture. We're going to fight that until the day we die.